Hello. So this is an asynchronous pre-recorded presentation on working online, presenting yourself to employers, as well as actually how you manage working online. And it's part of the how-to series from CareerCentral. My name's Adrienne and I'm one of the careers advisors at CareerCentral. So by the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that you'll have a clearer idea about why online recruitment and working is likely to become more important over the coming years post-pandemic. Not that we're post-pandemic, but as a result of the pandemic. Recognise the type of situations you may encounter online working and interviews, and some of the tips and tricks for actually helping you to manage this. The idea of developing a professional online identity, so increasingly seeing online working and the challenges that might bring, particularly early career. Things that you can do to build your confidence, and also thinking about barriers and some of the ways that you might overcome them. So we have seen some advantages since COVID really hit and started impacting on the way that we live and we work. And many employers, UEA being one of them, were forced to move online with a good deal of their delivery. But it does mean that location became less of an issue, and we have seen a kind of a knock-on effect that there are opportunities still available, even though workplaces have opened up, for people to work remotely. So it's made the idea of remote working more acceptable to employers than perhaps 18 months, 2 years ago. It does give us flexibility. There is the potential there for you to work a different working pattern of hours depending on who you're working with. And so there's some pressure there from employers to still have a 9 to 5 core hour. But there's definitely flexibility being built into the system for many organisations. And in terms of career development and understanding and managing your career, we've certainly seen that online events do allow us to engage with a wider range of employers and alumni, which means that you get to speak to a wider range of employers and alumni. And employers actually do really like the online approach with things like recruitment fairs and special events. So I think that's something that we're going to see, and obviously that has environmental advantages as well in terms of the impact of travel. But there are some disadvantages. We still have to be aware of our surroundings. It can be challenging when you're in a shared house or you're living at home. It can feel still, I think, even after all this time, like a very it's a process that makes you very visible, so making you feel perhaps vulnerable and having to manage this space and this technology at the same time as performing perhaps an interview or completing your tasks. It's really tough sometimes when you're dealing with tech issues, or you're just having to look at yourself, or your laptop's not powerful, or your internet connection isn't good enough. And we've all had to learn a lot more around netiquette, how we stay focused, how we maintain that focus, how we behave appropriately. And it's always important to think about the presenter, because quite often the presenter is speaking to a blank screen. There's nobody kind of visible to them. And so when you're receiving online tuition or you're engaging in an online meeting, actually participating in that also helps the speaker know that you do exist and you haven't gone off and made yourself a cup of tea. And I think what we're going to see over the course of the next few years, as I say, is an increase in online working. And particularly where people are being introduced to an organisation online and maybe spending more time online than in a physical office, it does become more challenging, I think, to develop this sense of a professional identity. So, as you can see here, professional identity defined as the attitudes, values, knowledge, beliefs and skills shared with others within a professional group. And that's the Adams, Heenan, Sturgis, MacLeod quote there. So it can really take many forms. The idea that you have a vocational identity, that you can give yourself a name. I am a careers advisor. That's what I am. That's how I define myself in terms of my vocational identity. So you can give yourself that title and you understand and feel confident naming yourself in that way. And sometimes that can take time to develop that vocational identity, and it can take longer if you're working primarily in an online environment. Developing self-efficacy, confidence in your own ability, gathering a sense of those shared values and beliefs around your work and the purpose of your work, understanding expectations of behaviour and the whole way that we kind of develop a workplace culture can be challenging when you're working at least part of your time even online. Building those relationships, feeling part of an organisation and its purpose. Sharing knowledge, knowing about other people's responsibilities, just quite literally being able to visualise the structure of the organisation if that structure is virtual as opposed to actual in a building with departments and floors and offices and social areas. So it's really taking time sometimes to really get a sense of where you fit and what your responsibilities are to yourself, to your peers, to your organisation. So it does become more challenging, I think, developing professional identity if the bulk of that is being done in this sort of environment. And it does begin with recruitment. So we're beginning, this process of learning how to operate online when we're undergoing any kind of online recruitment activity. Kind of a way of thinking about professional identity, if you're not a student who is studying perhaps medicine or healthcare, where there are very clear parameters set out for professional identity, is this idea of conscious competence through to unconscious competence. So the idea here, and this is a model that's used in coaching quite a lot, is that we all go through a process whilst we're learning and being comfortable with the skills and the knowledge that we're deploying. So we begin unconsciously incompetent. We don't really know what we're not doing properly. We have a sense that we don't know it, but we can't necessarily identify the things that we don't know. As we gain more experience and we know more about our role, then we become consciously incompetent. And so there we know that we're not doing something as well, but we're aware that we still need to learn and develop that skill. So we're conscious that we're not quite there yet. We then become consciously competent. We know that we're doing it and we can do it, but we have to really think about it. We're very conscious of deploying this skill or using this knowledge. And then once you're established in a role, you're comfortable with the skill area and the knowledge area, you become unconsciously competent. And so you know what you're doing, but you're not really having to think about it. It's just there. And driving is a very, very simple example of how you might move from unconscious incompetence, so not knowing that you need to put the clutch down with the brake, otherwise you'll stall the engine, through to unconsciously competent, and you're just driving and your brain is doing lots of other things at the same time because your brain knows how to do this driving thing, so it's unconsciously doing what it needs to do. So that's one way of thinking about professional identity, and I think that slide really is there to sort of think about how getting to that point of unconscious competence can take a little bit longer when you don't have all of the elements of working in a physical space with a team and with colleagues, how long it can take to sort of put that into place. I think it's super important to have dialogue with employers, and it's worth remembering that we all had to adjust when the pandemic befell us, and employers had to adjust how they worked with their employees, how they recruited, how they made changes to their working patterns and things to try and accommodate what was an unprecedented time. So if you have an interview coming up and you're concerned about your internet connection, or you're concerned about noise, interruptions, think about the things that you can take control over, but also think about informing the employer. So if it's an interview and you've got a bad internet connection, then get in touch with the HR team or whoever's invited you to interview in advance and say, I just want you to be aware that my internet connection has been really poor of late, so I'm giving you a backup telephone number. I will try and get through to you, but I may switch my camera off to improve the bandwidth, but I'll obviously try and go ahead as planned. So you're just informing them, you're letting them know. And are there things that they can come back with, that could actually be helpful because they've encountered it? So speak to people when it comes to working online. Think about that professional background, blurring your screen, using apps so you can download different backgrounds, or creating a clearer space, putting up a backdrop, booking a room in the library, finding other ways to actually give yourself a space that's got a good internet connection and has possibly got a quieter and more neutral space for you to actually be in. And that's particularly important with interviews. So a little bit now about interviews. Two types of interview. The recorded asynchronous, so this is an asynchronous presentation, as you all know now after almost 2 years of working online. An asynchronous interview normally has pre-recorded questions, and you will be given a link and asked to follow that link and set up a time to do your recordings. It's usually in the early stage of recruitment, and you're normally given a set time for each response. So you're asked the question, given some thinking time, and then you record your response. They typically have practice questions or, as I say, thinking time, and some programs will allow you to re-record. All of the information about an asynchronous interview will be sent to you by the employer, so read that information really clearly and carefully beforehand. And then think about, when am I going to set time aside to carry this interview out? Typically it will be no more than 20 minutes in length. Usually it's a little bit shorter than that. Obviously a live, asynchronous online interview you're going to have on Teams or on Zoom or any other live platform. It could be Skype, for example, and you have real people in the room, in their room, and they're asking you questions live. So it's a traditional in-person interview that is being moved online for convenience or in case of lockdown because of restrictions. You may still have multiple interviewers, and there is an opportunity for two-way interaction. Remember that there are people effectively in the room with you, so it's difficult sometimes to look at the camera and not the screen, but remember that the camera's there, so you are making eye contact with the camera whilst you're probably spending some of your time looking at the person that you're speaking to as represented on the screen. You do the same prep as you do for any interview. What are the relevant examples? What's likely to come up? Looking at the job description and the person specification, what are the key things they're going to ask me? They're going to want to know about motivation, about why I'm applying for this job, but also they're going to look for some examples of the skills that they need. Practice, use the interview simulator. You can book mock interviews. If you've got a real interview coming up, then come and see us and book a mock interview. Make sure that you're doing all of the things you would do naturally. So making eye contact, smiling, so using that camera as the person in the room. If it's a recorded interview, then obviously you need to practice and use our online interview practice as a way of setting the timings and getting used to responding within a given time frame. And check your tech. Check your camera, check your software, check that you've downloaded the app, etc., etc. Do exactly what you would do for any online activity. And think about the other things that you would normally do for face-to-face interview preparation. Is there anything that you need to bring into this online space with you? We are still seeing some online assessment centres. We had obviously a whole period where all assessment centres were online, and some have started creeping back. I think the general kind of consensus within the careers team is that there will be employers who will keep an element of online assessment through their recruitment practices, even when we're out of the pandemic. So we think this is here to stay in some form or another. An assessment centre, as you may know, brings together a group of candidates in one day. Sometimes it's a half day. Lots of different things are assessed, and it typically comes towards the latter stages of the recruitment process and precedes interview, or may include a one-to-one interview on the day. It's not just for grad schemes. Large employers across many sectors will use some form of online or face-to-face assessment centre. And certainly it saves on money, and that's one of the reasons why I think employers have decided that this is something they want to keep in their recruitment portfolio. It saves time, less travel, more efficient, more flexibility. It's easier for candidates to fit in because they don't have to get a train to London, stay overnight because the assessment centre starts at 8:30, and then they've got a whole day and then they've got to get back to Norwich, so it's much more convenient for candidates as well. Although obviously you're not getting a real sense of the organisation, and companies have had to work really hard to replicate in-person assessment centres. So employers have adapted assessment centres into virtual settings, and as I say, many of them are keeping some element of the virtual in their assessment processes. Some are running group exercises as one-to-one exercises instead. Others are putting groups into breakout rooms and asking them to undertake activities in that setting. So any practice that you can get still working online at university that gets you speaking, participating, using breakout rooms could be useful in the future. Very, very briefly, because this is covered by other presentations, but what we're talking about here are psychometric tests, work simulations, so asking you to address a question, or an E-tray exercise, so things that you need to sort through and prioritise, presentations, having to work on a case study and reporting on your findings, group exercise I've mentioned, and then formal interviews and speed interviews. So here's an example of Baker Mackenzie's. It's a half-day virtual assessment centre, and they've still maintained a group exercise. They've brought in a case study which is in one-to-one feedback rather than group or panel feedback, but really very little has changed from their original assessment centre in person. So the challenges you need to think about when you're being recruited online are how you make account of the lack of body language, being able to read people, picking up on those social cues, less informal networking, talking to other candidates. You don't quite have that space to socialise. Seeing that physical environment, what is their office like, what's it like to work there, and obviously screen fatigue, because we've all, had to learn how to adapt to working online. So it will be interesting to see how it pans out over the course of the next few years, and what elements remain online, and how employers give you the most meaningful experience in an assessment centre, whilst not necessarily getting you into the building until perhaps the very end stage of the recruitment process. At the end of this slide deck, and you will get a copy of this slide deck having viewed this presentation, you will see a series of links to other things that you can do to make the most of our resources and getting your head around assessment centres and things. Presentations online could be part of a recruitment process, could be prepared in advance, could be on the spot as a result of a group exercise, or it could be part of your job, and so it may be something that actually you don't necessarily do a great deal of in your interview, but there's an expectation in the job description. And we've got a presentation online that you can have a look at, and resources for developing your presentation skills. And presentations are really important to many employers because they need to know that you can research, you can engage, you can follow instructions, you can think about audience. There's lots of things being tested with a presentation. And online presentations, obviously, it's also the confidence to actually work the technology and get to grips. So know if you're being asked to do a presentation, whether you're allowed slides, what platform you're using, can you download the app so that you've got more functionality. So doing that basic preparation, and then follow the simple rules. Who's your audience? What time have you been allocated? Writing your slides, keeping your points simple, getting practice and getting feedback. So as I say, there's a whole presentation on presentations that you can also have a look at, and that's linked to in the end of these slides. Just general tips for building confidence. Interviews, presentations, assessment centres, they're in the room with you even if they're not. So as I say, using the camera to make eye contact, smiling, open posture, trying to position your camera in a way that means that you're not looking down on it or looking up at it, but your camera is level, is at as much at eye level as possible. Make sure you've done your preparation. Read through all of the instructions. If you're not clear, go back and ask. That's fine, but make sure you read it thoroughly first. If you can, if your broadband allows it and you're still doing some classes online at university, participate, because it will help you to gain confidence in this kind of environment. And you're going to need this, because even if you're working in an office when you start your postgraduate career, you're going to be doing this kind of thing. You're going to be having meetings on Teams. You're going to be speaking to people over Skype. This way of working has stayed for good. And so the more confidence you can build in online working whilst you're at university, the better it is for your future. Attend events, go to Bright Network, come to some of our events, just get used to networking online and any opportunities that help you develop those online skills. Learn about your platforms, use LinkedIn Learning, use our online courses to help you feel more confident when it comes to actually doing the job. So are there skills that you need to really gain a bit more experience in? Think about UEA mentors, who are a great way of finding out more about what it's been like working in an online environment. What's changed about our mentors' jobs since the pandemic? Are things returning to the old normal, or is there a new normal? So by speaking to UEA mentors, you can actually find out how people's workplaces have changed and adapted as a result of COVID. And I've just repeated my bullet points there because they're important. Get involved, get accustomed, look for opportunities. And anybody that you will be working with has had to adapt as well. So you're not the only person who's doing this. Everybody has patience. Everybody understands how challenging this process is. So there are more recommendations for online working at the end of this deck, with links for you to look at in your own time. So thinking about online working and online interviews, is there anything that you need to think about in more depth? Are there other workshops perhaps that you might need to attend? I've talked about assessment centres, I've talked about interviews, I've talked about presentations, I've talked about online tests and things. So are there those elements that you need to understand in greater depth? I've talked about graduate schemes and graduate jobs. Is that something that actually as a concept is new to you? All of these things are followed up in the other how-to workshops. And so please do sign up to other workshops, whether they are asynchronous like this and you can just access them through Career Hub, or whether they are running on Blackboard, or heaven to wish for real physical workshops, which we hope will start back up again in the spring. So have a think about what your next steps are, and as I say, there is a whole load of additional resources and next steps for you to link through to, and these slides will be made available to you having viewed this video. And remember that there's loads and loads and loads of things that we at Career Central are here to help you with. So please make the most of our services, please get involved, please ask for help. Thanks for listening, and I hope that's given you just a few ideas about how you can develop your confidence working online and interviewing online, and please do just come and ask us for help if you need it. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.